Okay, so these are the notes for 3.4. We're going to start using the quadratic formula. So we've learned 3 other methods to solve quadratics. We've learned graphing, square roots, and factoring. And those work some of the time. Well, graphing on the calculator always works, but it gives you decimal answers. But if we want the exact answer, the quadratic formula is the way to go. So the quadratic formula is if you have the equation in standard form, your quadratic equation, so it's equal to 0. A is the number that comes in front of x squared, B is the number that comes in before the x, and C is the constant. So we take A, B, and C, just those numbers, not including the x's, and we plug them into this formula. Our x's will equal negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and everything is over 2 times a. And so this is how we're going to use it. So in this problem, if nothing is in front of my x squared, there's really like a 1 there. So I have a equals 1, b equals negative 7, and c equals negative 18. Okay? And I take those and I plug them into this formula. But everywhere I have a variable, I put parentheses. So I have that my x's are going to equal negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. Everything is over 2 times a. Okay? So I just go through and simplify a little bit now. Okay? So it's still going to be x equals, I have a negative 7 makes a positive 7, plus or minus, I'm going to have some square root, but I'm going to go ahead and simplify that in a minute. Everything is going to be over 2 times 1, which is 2. Now, in my calculator, I type in everything inside the square root. That's called the discriminant. So I just take my calculator and I put parentheses where they're supposed to be. Really don't have to put in times 1 because anything times 1 is itself, but there it is. This is everything under the square root. I'm not typing in the square root, and I'm not typing in 7 plus or minus square root. I am just typing in everything underneath it. So I got 121. Okay? So I have a square root of 121. All right. Well, I can take a square root of 121. At this point, if you can't simplify it, leave it. If you can't take square root of the whole thing, just simplify it by taking out the largest perfect square you can and simplify from there. Otherwise, just leave it if it doesn't simplify anymore. So this does, square root of 121 is 11. Everything else stayed the same. Now, because I actually am down to whole numbers, I need to go farther. Okay? This plus or minus just tells me I'm going to have 2 answers. I have 7 plus 11 over 2, and I'm going to have 7 minus 11 over 2. That's what the plus minus is. Okay? So 18 divided by 2, negative 4 divided by 2. Here are my solutions. Okay? Now, you can always use the graphing calculator to check these. So if I enter in my 2 equations, my equation, remember just the 0 becomes your y, so it's x squared minus 7x minus 18. You graph it, and it is where your graph crosses that x-axis. Well, it crossed at negative 2, and it crossed at positive 9. There are my solutions. So I did the quadratic formula correct. All right, I'm going to do this next one in a different color because I kind of went a little big there. All right, so the problem with this equation to start with is that it is not equal to 0. So I'm going to get it equal to 0 by moving everything. I just get the w squared positive sometimes I don't care. If I'm factoring, I always want that w squared to be positive just because it makes it easier, but I'm using the quadratic formula, I'm not factoring. This one would have been factorable because I got nice pretty whole numbers, okay? So you could have done that one factoring. But this one, you'll see our answer is not nice and pretty, that factoring would not work. So I'm just going to move the or I'm sorry, going to move the w squared over, so it actually becomes 0 equals a negative w squared. When I do the quadratic formula, I do not care if that is positive or negative. I really don't care either way, but it just makes it easier in factoring if it's positive. So A is now negative 1, B is a positive 4, and C is negative 1. And I plug those things in. So it's negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C. Everything is over to A. And this is what X equals. Okay? Now we simplify a little bit. I have negative times positive 4, so that's negative 4. I'm going to have a plus or minus some square root all over a negative 2. Now, here, before we even do the square root, I want to point out that I have negative 4 and a negative 2, and we can say this is negative as well because that plus or minus, this is both ways, right? So if I can divide all three things by a number, I can go ahead and do that. And in this case, I can divide them all by a negative. So that makes this positive and this positive. This, because of that plus or minus, it's going to stay the same no matter what. So, just want to show you that you actually get positive answer. And then I type everything in my calculator, and I get a number. And in this case, you're going to get 12. Now, I can't take, like over here, I could take the square root of 121. I cannot take the square root of 12 and get a nice, pretty number. I'm going to get a decimal, but I can simplify it. Remember, square root of 12 is the same thing as saying square root of 4 times square root of 3. 4 is the biggest perfect square that comes out of 12. So I'm going to rewrite this using this instead of the 12, okay? So we're not going to use the 12 anymore. And I can take the square root of 4. So x is going to equal a positive 4 plus or minus square root of 4 is 2. I still have the square root of 3. And it is over 2. All right? And you can take this even farther. I can still divide all three numbers by, or all three terms by a number, and I divide them all by 2. So I'm going to get x is equal, if I divide 4 by 2, I get 2. If I divide 2 square root of 3 by 2, I just get square root of 3. And 2 divided by 2 is 1, so everything is over 1. So this is my two terms. I have an x plus square root of 3, and, I'm sorry, not x, I'm sorry, 2 plus square root of 3 and a 2 minus square root of 3. I would still take the answer if you leave it like this. That's not wrong. Square root of 12 is a number. It'll be fine. But I like to get you in the practice of simplifying the radical in your problems, because when you take the ACT and stuff like that, it will be simplified. And you just need to know those are still the same problems or answers. And you can even check this on the calculator. If you were to punch 2 plus square root of 3 in your calculator, you're going to get 3.73, and if you type in 2 minus square root of 3, you're going to get 0.27, and then you can check those on the calculator and see that the graph does go through those, but that's not the answer I want you to give me. That is only for checking. I want the exact answer, okay? Now, this one, again, I need to get it to where I have it equal to 0, so I'm just going to move the one term over. So I'm going to get 0 equals a negative 4z squared plus 7z minus 3. So A is negative 4, B is 7, C is negative 3. And I plug it in. X is going to equal negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, and everything is over 2 times A. And you do need to memorize this formula. We'll need that on your quizzes and stuff. I will not give it to you. Okay, so this simplifies. It's negative 7 plus or minus some square root. Then on the bottom, I'm going to get negative 8. Again, I have a negative over negative. These become positive. I type everything in to my calculator. I have square root of 1. Okay, I can take the square root of 1. That is actually a nice, pretty number. It's 1. And now I can go ahead and finish, not leaving an answer with the square root. I have 7 plus 1, and I divide by 8. That gives me 1. And then I have a 7 minus 1 divided by 8. And that's going to give me 3/4, which is the same thing as saying 0.75. So I don't care which way you give it. But these are my exact answers. You can graph it and see that it goes through those points. You may need to zoom in because they're very close to each other.